Look, let's be honest. Cartoon husbands are the reason a lot of people are scared of marriage. You think real-life relationships are hard? Try living in a cartoon world where the husbands are either completely clueless, super lazy, or in some cases, absolute maniacs. If you ever feel like you're having a rough time in your relationship, just remember, you could be married to one of these animated disasters, and trust me, your life would be 10 times worse. So grab some popcorn, sit back, and let's dive into the absolute worst cartoon husbands who somehow managed to make being a terrible partner look like an Olympic sport. Spoiler alert. By the time we're done, you might just want to stay single forever. Oh, and if you make it to the end of this video, you'll understand why Peter Griffin isn't just the worst, but the most impressively bad. Let's go. Peter Griffin, the idiot who makes everything worse. First up on the chopping block, we have the one and only Peter Griffin from Family Guy. I mean, could there even be a worst husbands list without this guy at the top? Peter Griffin might as well be the poster child for clueless husbands everywhere. Let's start with the obvious. Peter has the mental processing power of a half-baked potato. Remember the time he decided that buying a pirate ship was the perfect way to bond with his family? You know, because nothing says loving father and husband like almost sinking your entire family with a ship you don't even know how to sail. Classic Peter. And don't even get me started on how he treats Lois. Sure, Lois puts up with a lot, probably more than any sane woman should. But does Peter even try to make her life easier? Nope. This guy forgot their wedding anniversary because he was too busy engaging in an epic chicken fight. Yeah, a giant, never-ending brawl with a chicken took priority over the woman he supposedly loves. Priorities, am I right? But if we're going to talk about Peter Griffin, we need to touch on his legendary selfishness. This man once spent all their family savings on freaking lottery tickets. Let that sink in for a second. The man has a wife, kids, a mortgage, and he spends every penny they have because he's got a feeling they'll win. Spoiler alert, they don't. And let's not forget that episode where Peter got a hold of Quagmire's whip. Now, we all know Quagmire's probably into some pretty freaky stuff, but Peter decided to take that whip and use it on his own family. Stewie and Meg didn't know what hit them, literally. The fact that this man thought it was okay to whip his own kids just because he's bored? That's some next-level bad parenting and husbanding. Let's face it, Peter's main skill is somehow making every situation worse. It's like a superpower, but one that no one asked for. Whether he's nearly bankrupting the family, disrespecting Lois, or casually putting their lives at risk with his wild stunts, Peter Griffin is the walking definition of a train wreck and a dad bod. Honestly, it's almost impressive how bad he is at being a husband. Like, you'd think at some point, purely by accident, he'd get something right. But nope, the man's consistency in his failures is almost admirable. Almost. If there was a gold medal for being the worst husband, Peter Griffin would win it every time, no question. Homer Simpson, the lazy, loving oaf. And now we move on to Springfield to meet everyone's favorite lazy oaf, Homer Simpson from The Simpsons. Now I know what you're thinking, but Homer's kind of sweet sometimes. Yeah, sure. If you like your sweet with a side of pure incompetence, let's just get this out of the way. Homer's the kind of guy who'd forget your birthday but remember where he hid the last donut. And don't even pretend like Marge isn't the real MVP of that relationship. She's holding that entire family together while Homer is trying his best, but let's be honest, his best is usually just not good enough. Homer's laziness is legendary. We're talking about a guy who literally tried to gain weight so he wouldn't have to go to work. Remember that episode? He wanted to be declared medically obese so he could work from home. That's the level of dedication we're dealing with here. Not to his family, mind you, but to his laziness. But it's not just his lack of effort that makes him a bad husband. It's also his emotional neglect. Marge is out here putting in all the work, raising their 3 kids, keeping the house in order, and what does Homer do? He sleeps through their wedding anniversary. Yep, you read that right. The man can't even stay awake for the one day he's supposed to make an effort. Talk about romantic. And then there's his reckless behavior. Homer Simpson is the poster child for bad decision-making. From spending all their savings at Mr. Burns' casino to impulsively buying a snowplow business that almost ruins them, Homer's decisions are consistently terrible. If there's a way to mess things up, Homer will find it, and then fall asleep on the couch afterward. But, and here's the kicker, you almost want to forgive him because, deep down, Homer does love Marge. Sure, he's a lazy, donut-obsessed man-child, but at least he occasionally tries. Kind of. Except most of the time, that trying just leads to even bigger disasters. Like that one time he bought a bowling alley gift certificate for himself on Marge's birthday. So, what have we learned? Homer Simpson is a lovable oaf, but as a husband, he's as useful as a chocolate teapot. If Peter Griffin's the reckless disaster, Homer's the lazy bum who, through some miracle, hasn't completely driven Marge to divorce court. Yet, Jerry Smith, the whiny, insecure doormat. Now that we've dealt with the disaster that is Homer Simpson, let's take a hard left and visit someone who's less of a reckless idiot and more of a complete doormat. Jerry Smith from Rick and Morty. If you thought being a clueless, lazy oaf like Homer was bad, wait until you meet Jerry, the human embodiment of insecurity. Jerry Smith is the kind of husband who gets his feelings hurt when his wife so much as breathes in a slightly critical tone. This man spends 90% of his time in an existential crisis, and the other 10% crying about it. If you've ever wondered what happens when you take zero confidence and mix it with desperation, well, congratulations. Jerry Smith is your answer. First off, Jerry's complete and utter lack of confidence is so bad, it makes him a walking disaster. Remember the time he tried to impress his father-in-law by shooting a deer? Yeah, instead of looking like a manly man, he ended up sobbing while trying to save the deer's life and then failing miserably. You gotta give it to him, though. Jerry's consistent. Consistently pathetic, but consistent nonetheless. And let's talk about his relationship with Beth. Honestly, Beth could do so much better, and she knows it. You can practically see the secondhand embarrassment on her face every time Jerry says or does something. Jerry's constant whining and needy behavior have driven Beth to the brink of divorce multiple times. But somehow, he always finds a way to crawl back into her life like a lost puppy that no one asked for. One of Jerry's most iconic traits? His crippling dependency. He relies on Beth for everything, from emotional support to basic decision-making. In fact, Jerry's decision-making skills are so terrible that it's a miracle the family hasn't imploded because of him. Well, more than it already has. Remember the time he put the entire family at risk by teaming up with an intergalactic daycare full of parasitic space creatures? Yeah, solid call there, Jerry. But what really sets Jerry apart from the rest of the Worst Husbands Club is his constant need for validation. He's so desperate for approval that he once joined a planet-wide cult just because they treated him like a king. And did Jerry stop to think, hey, maybe these guys are a little sketchy? Of course not. He was too busy basking in the glory of being worshipped by aliens. In the grand hierarchy of terrible husbands, Jerry Smith doesn't fail because he's a jerk. He fails because he's a spineless, whiny, insecure mess who constantly drags his wife and kids into his emotional chaos. If Peter Griffin is the hurricane of bad decisions, Jerry is the constant drizzle that makes everything just a little worse every day. And the sad part? Despite being so incompetent, Jerry still believes he deserves respect. The delusion is real, folks. Stan Smith, the paranoid, overbearing control freak. If Jerry is what happens when you have no backbone, Stan Smith from American Dad is what happens when you have way too much. This guy is more rigid than the steel vault he probably uses to store his emotions. And let's just say, controlling doesn't even begin to describe him. Stan Smith, the CIA operative who somehow thinks he's James Bond, is a paranoid control freak with a side of emotional constipation. This man's idea of a good time is probably bugging his own house just to make sure no one's talking smack about him behind his back. I mean, why trust your family when you can spy on them 24/7, right? First of all, Stan's obsession with his job at the CIA regularly gets in the way of being a good husband and father. He prioritizes national security over literally everything else, including his own wife, Francine. Poor Francine. She's married to a guy who's more concerned about what's going on in North Korea than what's going on in her life. And it's not just his job. Stan has a superiority complex the size of Texas. He genuinely believes he knows what's best for everyone in his family, and if they don't agree with him, well, they're clearly wrong. Remember the time Stan tried to brainwash Francine into thinking she was a housewife from the 1950s because he thought it would make her happier? Yeah, because what every modern woman wants is to be transported back to a time when women's rights were practically non-existent. Great call, Stan. But perhaps Stan's biggest flaw is his inability to deal with emotions, either his own or anyone else's. Instead of talking about his feelings like a normal human being, Stan bottles everything up until he eventually explodes, usually in a way that ruins a family event. Classic Stan. It's also worth noting that Stan has a major problem with sensitivity. The man just doesn't get it. Case in point, when his daughter Haley brought home a boyfriend Stan didn't like, instead of handling the situation maturely, he tried to have the guy deported. Because of course, Stan's solution to everything is, how can I use the CIA to fix this? I bet this guy would microchip his entire family if he could, just to keep tabs on them. What's wild is that, despite all his glaring issues, Stan still thinks he's the ideal husband and father. He genuinely believes he's doing everything for his family's best interest, even though his actions usually cause way more harm than good. Whether he's meddling in Francine's life, controlling his kids, or using CIA tactics to get his way, Stan Smith is like a drill sergeant in a suburban dad's body. And let's be honest, that's not what anyone wants in a husband. The scary part? Stan actually loves his family. He just loves them his way, which often means completely smothering them with his need for control. It's not exactly what you'd call a healthy marriage, but hey, as long as national security's intact, right? In conclusion, if you're ever feeling like your partner is a little too controlling, just remember, at least they're not Stan Smith. Because if they were, your house would probably be rigged with spy cams and polygraph tests.